Good afternoon. First, just a quick thank to Maxim, who stepped in last minute. We were supposed to have Julius here. Julius is one of our volunteer team members. He has been working with us since DjangoCon in the beginning of this year. Unfortunately, he's from Ghana, and visas are not that easy to come by. We waited till last minute, but he wasn't able to be here. But Maxim surely will do him a great talk instead of Julius.
Thank you. Hello? 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 Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, cool. Probably some information about lightning talks. Can you provide?
Maybe some of you haven't noticed it yet. We have just outside the auditorium a board in which you can sign up for a lightning talk. In case your submission of a talk wasn't approved, or maybe you just want to try it out for the first time, be our guest, just sign the word with the name of the talk, your name, and then at the end of the day, you will be called to come on stage and do the talk. So if you want to try out, maybe the first time you are a bit nervous, don't be shy, just sign the words and come to the stage, do your best. So I'll leave you with Maxim for now.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm very glad to be here, and I'm very proud because this is my third time in Portugal. Thank you for organizers. And right now, I offer you to talk or to think about complexity. Complexity in our code. And also, we can think or discuss how we can spread complexity. And this my talk is the third part of series of my talk about distributed complexity and simply about complexity in code. Before I start, I want to say thank you for my family who supported me on every conference which I participate. Thank you for my wife, Elena. Thank you for my animals, Marcel and Kisa. And special thanks to my children, Mark and Maya, because they are illustrators for this presentation. Thank you, Mark and Maya. If I say wrong, Mark and Maya. Marcel and Kisa is animals. Okay, and let's go. Who I am. I am Maxim Danilov. I work more than 26 years in commercial software development, and 9 years I work deeply with Python and Django, and more than 6 years I work with different reactive frameworks, front-end frameworks. Also, I'm already 7 times won the title Super Mentor in Engineering, and I offer author support for newbies in Python or in programming on the mentoring platform for free. Many years. Okay, and let's go. All successful startups are happy in their own way, and all mature projects are unhappy in the same way. I have seen many matured projects written on Python or on other programming languages, and I have collected some similar signs about complexity in project. Let's imagine. In 2000, startup starts in 2013. In 2015, it was a big Django project, a little bit with REST API implementation. But 2 years later, it was not enough, and some elements in this project was added. And these elements used Flask somehow. And after that, in 2018, it was all run with AWS Lambda. And later, in 2019, Fast API was added in this project. But CTO was not happy with all solution, and every year he tell on the monthly meetings, boys, we should refactor this whole mess. And after that it came cloud computing from Google, and after that appears Lightstar. Previously it was Starlight. After that it was renamed. Lightstar appears in project. And probably you know Django Ninja also was included in this project. And later I came in this startup last year, but this is not more a startup. This is already how many years? 10 years. And with my help on this project, start works with micro Django paradigm. This is I did many talks in this year about this paradigm. Micro Django means some APIs or endpoints run it with asynchronous micro or nano containers built on Django. Okay, probably you already can understand this is a huge project. We can calculate as around 300,000 lines of code with different frameworks, built with different frameworks from different programmers, and this is really one mess to work with that. And refactoring to this solution, to this implementation is not a solution. At first, refactoring takes time. If I create this project around 10 years, probably 6 years takes refactoring for that. Refactoring stops our growth, but we cannot stop growing of project because we can lose the customers who pay their money. And refactoring increase costs and not increase incomes. And in other words, I like this sentence. Refactoring converts old bugs and wrong decision into other bugs and other wrong decision. That's why I hear many times from different developers, we should refactor this all, and I only can third. You don't understand what are you speaking. Microservices. Microservices, this is interesting paradigm, and probably we can transform our project on the microservices. But in the same time, this is also refactoring. And we got the same effect. We stop growing of our project. We block teams to refactor monolith in microservices. And what we can do? And in this case, I can offer you how I offer for CTO of this project the idea about modular monolith. Modular monolith was perfect described with Camille Gritzberg. It was around 5 or 6 articles about it. You can find it in the internet. And accordingly to this idea, I create some small project which calls dependency extractor. And right now I want to tell you how I work with huge and complex projects with this paradigm and this library. At first, generally, we have monorepo monolith only with one entry point. What I mean entry point? It's not, usually this is a web entry point, but this can be command for script. Some function which solves somehow business task. This is entry point for business. And we have solved the first business goal with this entry point. After that, we have other business goals, and we create the new entry point. And you can see the new entry point reuse some code. Not always, but can reuse. And after that, the project grows, and we have more and more entry points or more and more solution for business tasks, and also some reusable code appears. But somehow this monolith transforms in a messy project, and Gritzberg offers us to think about we can split monorepo on different modules. The first entry point, the second entry point, and they simply we can store these entry points in different folders. Of course, don't repeat yourself rule, completely broken. I understand it, I accept it, but this is not bad. Okay, we split our code on different entry points. And I create the script accordingly. This script used IST module from Python. You can download it, you can use it as is. And what we can do with this script? Simply, I provide the name of file in my big project, and after that, in this file, the script finds different imports and copy in different folder. Not only this file, also this script copy imported modules. And it made it recursively. IST goes through, it's simply a small script. It goes through the text of file, find import node from IST, and every time marks, okay, if this import happens, we should copy also imported file. And you can see, I collect the imports from the first file. After that, accordingly the order of imports, I copy the other files. In every copied files, I again collect imports, and somehow I collect all files which I need in one folder, which provide for me working entry point, only one entry point. And this is really interesting because this entry point works. All internal dependencies collected. We can easily pack this entry point in one independent container or more entry points. And interesting is, I don't do any refactoring. This is only copy file to other folder. My idea not works if code written without declaration some external or internal dependencies somehow. Sometimes this idea not works. I use it with PyTorch. Sometimes it not works because I still not able to copy dependencies with C libraries. Probably, I hope I extend this script for that. And sometimes dependencies named others, like folders, and in this case, yeah, it's also not works. And some issues also discovered in Python. For example, relative imports and symlinks not works perfect in Python or the IST module. Also, sometimes developers forget to catch errors on collect environments in modules. And sometimes if you write doc strings with HTML tags, in this case, IST module is also false. And sometimes importly breaks our game. But which advantage I have with this script or this idea? At first, I spread technical or cognitive complexity through different folders. And after that, I can split teams for supporting only small parts of code. You can see on the left side we have messy monolith. On the right side we have blocks of code for every team member. Advantages also, and this is important, I don't do any refactoring with code. Also, we got it a little bit later. We see it reduce container image and reduce package loading time to the external storage. And we can run extract procedure exactly before creating the image for container. And of course, it's clear, understandable. If we got some errors on production, we can stop only selected container and refactor code in selected container if it important. But we should not stop the full container with our monolith. And simply result on the chosen project. We have source folder with 2,700 files, as 700 folders, and 21 application in Django application paradigm. As a result, only for one entry point, we have coupled around 750 files. In my opinion, this is the bad engineering solution because this is too high coupling. And probably you can remember we have a rule, low coupling, high cohesion. And also in this script, I prepare foundation for future changes in project. I create report about imports, I create report about imported classes, and I create also information, I collect also information about how many classes imported from line to line, on one import line. And what we have in this report, for example, report about classes, we can see in the class enum imported for work in one entry point container, it's imported 112 times. And other helper classes also imported around 100 times. Probably. This is only the signs about these elements can be packed in external model and can be stored also in repository, and it can be also imported if it important like a external dependency. Probably. The next report tell me about imports. For example, in one file we have 73 lines of import. This is, my opinion, this is a problem. Of course, I understand what happens there. This is like a Java developer start to write the Python code, and they create service factory. And in this case, this is a GOT object, and they collect all objects from whole project. In this case, this is a wrong decision, and this report simply to show me the places their complexity is concentrated. Probably these files can be somehow refactored or rethinked. This solution can be re-implemented. But simply try to imagine. Every normal developer can keep in head around from 7 bis 10 elements. And somebody imported more than 73 classes. I'm not genie to work with all these classes, to keep all this in my head. And probably nobody can do it. Probably, I'm not sure. And let's go deeper. I start to investigate this project, and what I find a little bit later. I find what some imports we have only to define type hints. It means they don't do anything, anything else, only they import it for type hinting. Okay, and I thought, what happens if I remove type hints and if I delete unused imports? What can happen? I create the additional script, hunt hint, and this script goes through the imported entry point. They find files for hinting. Also, they find how many hints used. Also, this script says me how many lines of code will be changed. And also interesting, in this script, I have collected information about the whole project. And we can see it's only around 2,000 class definitions with different functions. And it's around 7,000 function definitions in this project. And it's only a question for my developers. Boys, are you working in function-based paradigm or in object-oriented paradigm? And statistically, I see they work still with functions. Okay. But they say, of course, we work with OOP. Okay. Some hints, statistic. We can see some classes really imported, some classes from our project really imported to use in type hints, and probably we can avoid it. In this script, I change all classes on types any, because for data classes we cannot remove type hints simply. And what happens? After the script's finished, I have typing any everywhere. The project still works, but what we have many unused imports. After that, I use simply autoflake to remove all unused imports. And what I have, ta-da! Before it was 560 dependencies, and without type hints, we have only 505 dependencies. And also, we need not too much libraries to install, and summary files, summary for files was changed. It was after the working with type hints, after removing the type hints, I have low lines of code. And it's around 25%. It was 40,000. Here I have the 30,000 lines of code. In this case, you can see the complexity statistically was reduced. And this is a truth which you cannot avoid. The type hints statistically increase the complexity of your project. I'm not against type hints, but try to think about it. Final check. How I can check if all works? Simply pack in container and run it. Of course, all should be covered with tests. But if you don't have any tests, like in this example, we can only try to run it. And also, we can also check if all works or not if we try to import any file. If import happens, it means statistically we did the good work, good job. Okay, summary. Small summary about my talk and how I spread complexity in different projects. It was e-commerce platform. It was medical data lake observations project. It was the voice assistant project with more than 800,000 lines. At first, refactoring of huge database or codebase is not a solution. I'm completely sure about it. The second, we can easily isolate a selected part of code into a separate package. And after that, team can work only with this package. And of course, files which reuse code from other packages, these files should be transformed in additional model external dependency. If we import some objects frequently, probably it should be also removed in some external package. And the last suggestion, type hints statistically increase complexity of your code. And simply, you can think about it. Thank you for your attention. Slides you can find from all my talks you can find in repository. And if you want, we can easily check any your project with my script, how we can transform it with my script, and you can use it. I'm here on conference. Simply ask me about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Maxim, for your talk. Now, once again, any questions for the speaker?
Great talk, thank you. How to handle engineers that are attached to dry and solid, and if they don't want to embrace this approach in repeating code, and how do you approach them? I mean, it's also about people, right? So how to convince them or explain to them that this is a good way to solve the problem?
The best way to solve the problem to create a code style guide for every project which you start. And after that, accordingly, style guides should work every developer. If in style guide we write directly dry can be wet, probably don't repeat yourself paradigm. It's not too important for this project. Or other case, it should be dry as much as possible. And after that, every developer should follow this code style guide, because it gives the one form for whole project. And after that, I can do anything what I want, because I don't do any refactoring. I simply follow the style guides, and I pack the small parts of messy monolith in containers. And I do it exactly before production. It means if somebody wants to work with whole code repository, please. I don't want to break this decision. But of course, if you feel dry is broken, for example, or solid is broken, or something is broken, at first, what is written in your style guide? If it allowed, don't matter. If it not allowed, probably solution should be refactored. And only in the small situations, small cases, style guide can be overridden. But this is the last decision which should not be done. But my solution is simply splitting the messy monolith with the same rules on the small monoliths or small modules.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Welcome.
So my question is about, is this, what you propose, is this a one-time solution where you do this split of the monolithic repository into different modules? Or, and then they continue the work independently? Or is this just, so they keep working as it is and is just for...
Presentation.
Or for splitting in the containers for the production environment?
At first it was invented for medical database, medical data lake. This data lake stored medical observation. It was really messy, and it was the first time there I implemented. In this project, it was split. The project was split on around 12 different blocks, and after that we have split teams on 13 teams, because every team works with this block, and one team work with core module. In this module, we have remove all repeated code. But after that, I like this idea. Also, it works together with micro Django paradigm. And after that, I started implemented, everywhere. And right now, I write all my projects or ideas in micro Django style. That's all. But right now, it was implemented in 4 huge project with 800,000 lines, 300,000 lines, 200,000 lines, and 32,000 lines. 4 projects. Once more time, we can implement the script on every project, and we can see what happens. Right now, I try to reduce image from PyTorch. It means I want to reduce 8 gigabyte image in small image, which use only functions and models which I need in my project. Once more.
Any more questions?
And what do you think about when we refactor code, we can find and optimize it while refactoring? And also, I understand that type hints, we can remove it if it's maybe a small project, but if it's in your case when you want to divide it, with removing type hints, and other programmers will just not understand your code, and they will try to understand it for weeks without type hints. Is it a solution for a big project?
At first, I can show you many professional code with type hints, which completely not readable, because it's wrong written. Also, some of these models implemented in raw Python. But I already wait this question about refactoring. About refactoring, it's so. Martin Fowler, many years ago, defined the idea about touch depth zero tolerance zone. We have in our project only the 5% of files which should be refactoring. Other files should be left as is. And in this case, refactoring can be applied on these 5% files in your repository, but all other files, please leave alone. Please don't touch it. And it's you can have a simple answer for that. For example, I write one file, and I got $100 for this work. After that, I start to refactor, but nobody pays for this refactor. And it means I worked with the files already 2 times, and it means, for me, I get for this work, instead of $100, only $50. And if I start to work with this file the 3rd time, again, I reduce the price of my work. After the 10 times, I start to work like a charity. But I'm not a charity, I'm a programmer which want to get the money. And in this case, refactoring is not a solution. And accordingly, statistically, idea from Fowler, we can define which files can be refactored and other files, please don't touch. The idea for clear described from Michael Fieders, and you can read about it. How to define which files you can touch, and after other part of your project, please don't touch. Only if you have a business goal and somebody want to pay for that, why not? You can refactor it.
If you're working at hourly rate and you can do refactoring as many as you want.
Yeah, probably.
Thank you.
Welcome. About type hints we can discuss later. But also I await the example from this. I don't like type hints exactly because this. I describe what is it, but after that I should transform again. Don't repeat yourself broken into lines of code.
But it's not relevant for it is int and it will be passed in int.
Yeah.
Another it will be an error.
This example simply try to search in internet how many milliard lines of code breaks the don't repeat yourself rule with type hints. Right now, type hints wrong implemented in Python, and many people still work with that. Okay, why not? Sorry if I'm a little bit hard about it.
Pydantic tried to solve this.
Yep. About Pydantic, it was perfect talk on Pycon Lithuania. And on Pycon Lithuania, Pydantic developer of Pydantic declares which problem they have. And after this talk, I also discuss about problems with Pydantic. Pydantic used this wrong solution to create a good idea. Accepted. For that, Pydantic, it's perfect. But but the idea about type hinting in Python right now, it's wrong. Sorry. Yeah, my opinion. I'm finished. We can discuss it later. And welcome. Thank you.
So thank you, Maxim, for your talk. We'll just welcome our next speaker on stage, João Vasconcelos, with his talk, Pushing the Boundaries of Django Managers.
Welcome. I want to have this.
No, I think I can use this. But thank you. E já estavam a dizer que se calhar preciso ligar o adaptador, não é? Eu tenho entrada HDMI deste lado. Mas depois não tens o comando, acho eu. Ah, ok. Ok. Então ligue só o adaptador, não é? Ok. Deixa-me experimentar. Test, test. Everyone can hear me? Yeah, perfect. So yeah, thank you first of all to Pycon for the opportunity and to my company Loca for helping me get here. So today I'm here to talk about pushing the boundaries of Django managers. This is a solution that we first developed about 3 years ago, and we thought other people might find it interesting, so here I am today to share it with all of you. But first, I think we need to do some introductions, right? So who's this guy on stage? I'm João Vasconcelos. I'm a backend team lead at Loca. I've been working in backend for about 5 years now. Worked with Python, worked with Django, Fast API, also with other languages like Golang, Node.js. So kind of a little bit of everything, but Python was definitely the first love and still the best one, let's say. I think one of the main reasons I got into computer science and specifically backend was definitely the fact that I love to solve problems, love system optimization, love to learn new things. So if you have anything interesting like the previous talks, please share them. I always love to come to these conferences and hear about new projects and cool little things. So as I mentioned, this was first developed in a Django-based project. And as you can also probably conclude from the title of the presentation, it's definitely a solution focused on Django. But it can easily be ported to other frameworks. It can be used just with Python. So even if you don't use Django, I bet you'll find it useful, and you'll find ways of applying it to your own project. So bear with me, and I bet at the end you'll want to try it out. So I know we already talked a little bit about Django today, but I decided to include this part for those that never used it before. So Django is a Python web framework built for rapid development. I think someone in the morning said it perfectly, so it's kind of like a big cannon, and most of the times you want to kill a small ant. So it follows a batteries included philosophy in the sense that it literally has everything, its own ORM, its own templating engine, its own authentication management system. So it's pretty great, and it allows you to move really fast, especially at the beginning. Maybe you just want to do a quick POC, see if things are working. At its core, it follows a model view controller approach, which in Django, at least in the Django web framework, is usually called model template view, since the template is the way you're going to show the data to the user and also receive input from the user itself. So the Django ORM is definitely, at least to me, one of the best features. I find it really intuitive to use and really easy. And it's also one of the features that we're going to focus on today, since we're going to try to kind of push beyond it and find a solution that's a little bit more extensible. So Django Manager is a concept in the Django framework. It's the interface through which you can perform database query operations, so it's the interface through which you can use the ORM. By default, once you define a model, it already comes with its own default manager. So you have access to a bunch of operations from the start, from data filtering to updating, creating, deletion, so anything you usually need. But obviously, once your project starts to grow, queries start to get more complex, logic starts to get more complex, you might feel the need to also build your own custom logic and kind of encapsulate it in a single spot. And that's when custom managers come in. So Django also allows you to build your own custom managers, encapsulate your own custom logic, which I find pretty great. And right here we have a perfect example of that. I don't know if everyone can see, but at the end I'll also have a QR code that you can scan with the presentation. But the idea here, the main point is that the bottom you have the reservation model. Probably can do this right, yeah. The bottom you have the reservation model, and then we define our own custom manager, active reservation manager, and we also allow the user to use the default manager. So it's just an example, but sometimes you also want to kind of just redefine it. And through its name, I think everyone can already understand the idea here is that every time I retrieve a reservation, I only want to retrieve active reservations. So the logic gets encapsulated here on the getQuerySet method, and it allows you to already have that set up. So like I mentioned, pretty great, pretty easy to use. I think it fits most of the use cases, but like everything, it has its limitations. And at least to us, what we start to feel is once queries start to get more complex, involving multiple joins, aggregations, subqueries. It might be hard to implement with the ORM, and even sometimes there's certain operations that the ORM just doesn't support. So customizing ORM queries for more advanced cases can become complex and also harder to extend, to read, to explain to other people. It also has a couple of problems. So one of them is the N+1 problem, which I bet a lot of people know. But for those of you who don't know, imagine you're retrieving a list of users and you have a related field that you're trying to access. And then for each row, for each user, you try to access it, and then Django is going to lazy load that for you, which means it's going to perform an extra query on the database. So maybe you're just not aware, and all of a sudden you have, I don't know, 10 more queries against your database, which can definitely degrade your system performance, cause unnecessary problems that you're not aware. So it's something that you need to be careful when using these type of tools. So how can we solve this problem, right? So this is also the question we asked ourselves within our project. We wanted to find a solution that could go beyond the ORM. So still use the ORM, but maybe in certain situations use also something else. And that's when we went on the lookout, and first we tried to just use plain raw SQL, right? So build our own SQL queries and then execute them, which Django is pretty great with that. It allows you to execute raw SQL in two different ways. So you can either use the raw method, which you can access to the manager, and it returns model instances. So in this case, it's good because it allows you to maybe build a more complex query, but you still have the benefits of the manager and the Django models, which will already do the parsing of the data for you. In situations where maybe you have a more complex query, it doesn't map one-to-one with your models, you can use the connection object directly. So it allows for that flexibility that in some situations you might need. And in our case, it was what we were using the most. So this solution allowed us to evolve a little bit more and kind of cross some problems that we had. But we also kind of quickly found a roadblock. And I mentioned a couple of problems here. One of them is definitely the fact that these type of solutions are can cause problems like the SQL injection problem. So obviously, the developer is responsible for making sure that you're only passing sanitized input into your queries. So it's definitely a problem which the ORM most of the times already protects you against that. And then another problem that we also found was the fact that once queries start to go, the complexity starts to grow. It also gets hard to manage that aspect. So I have an example in a few slides that I'll show you, and I think it will paint a good picture. But we got to a point where for more complex queries, we have kind of subsections spread across the functions, across the methods. And if you looked at it without executing it, it was hard to understand how everything kind of played out together. And it was hard also to understand what could I change, what could I not change without breaking something. So overall, it became difficult to read, maintain, especially as the complexity grew. So here we have an example pulled directly from the Django documentation of using the connection object. So like I mentioned, can execute any query that you need, and as you can see, it's pretty simple. And over here, so I don't know if everyone can see, but kind of the conclusion that I want you to take from this is that this was just one section of our users query about 3 years ago. I kind of removed a few parts and anonymized the others also. But the idea is that this was just one section that could eventually be included in the main query or not, depending if a certain condition was true, if a certain situation was happening or not. So as you can imagine, as someone who just came into the project and you look at this, you feel like, okay, I'm not going to touch this because I'm definitely going to break something. And this is what we also started to find. So we started to find that, yes, raw SQL was probably the way to go, but we needed maybe something else to manage our queries and to help us understand better what we were actually doing. So once again, we went on the lookout for another solution. And that's when we found Jinja. So for those of you who don't know, Jinja is a templating engine usually used to generate dynamic HTML. So over here on the right side, you can see I have an example of a simple HTML template. And it's using a few operations that Jinja provides. So the conditional blocks, the for loop, etc. So Jinja, it's a really powerful tool. It has a lot of operations, so for those of you who don't know, I would advise you to go to the Jinja documentation and explore it for yourself. But from the top of my head, it supports inheritance, filters, supports macros, and much more that you can use. And we'll touch on a couple of operations today, during a few examples. But as you can already imagine, we're not going to use it to render HTML, we're going to use it to render our own SQL queries. So in order to do that, we'll need Python, we're going to use the Jinja 2 Python package, and we're going to use SQLite 3 just as our simple database to make sure that our queries are working. And for this example, I want you to assume that we have a users table, something pretty simple. It doesn't really matter, like email, name, ID. And here on the right side, you can see that we already have our base SQL. So this is our SQL Jinja template. You can see that we're retrieving the users from the users table, and we're using a few operations that Jinja provides, like the apply ID. So this allows, not the apply ID, sorry, the if block, which allow us to include the ID or not, so filter by specific user or retrieve the entire list. And then you can also use specific parameters. So in our case, we define the sort by and the sort order, so dynamically you can specify if you want to sort by a specific column, ascending, descending, you know it. So this one is an example of us using that template. I know it might be hard to see, but at the top what we're doing is we're importing our environment class from Jinja, and this will store basically all of the configuration aspects of Jinja, so where you're storing the templates, any options regarding the renderization of the templates. And then once we define it, we will be able to use the environment object, as you can see down here, and we're going to use it to retrieve the template using its name. And then once we have the template, we can render it, and in this case, we're just going to pass a sort by and a sort order. And at the bottom, you can see exactly the output. So I just had 3 users in my table. But as you can see, it's sorted by name, it's sorted ascending. So pretty simple, really easy to use. But this case was also small example. And like I mentioned, we won't have time to kind of explore everything that Jinja has. But I still wanted to touch at least on this include operation, which I feel like it's really powerful. So for this example now, let's assume that besides our users table, we also have an orders table. So it's kind of like an e-commerce application. The orders table has a reference to the users table. It has a total that the user spent on that order. And we have a custom way of calculating statistics about these orders. So as you can see, we're going to kind of encapsulate that logic here on our stats template, which I know this is pretty simple, but let's imagine in a real world case, it would be something more complex that we didn't want to repeat. And on the right side, you'll have our nested SQL Jinja template. And this is just an extension of the simple template that we saw before. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use the include operation, and we're going to include the stats template. So this is a parameter that we, just like we passed the sort by and the sort order, we can also pass at render time. And in this case, you need to specify the template name in order for Jinja to then include it here. And we're going to join against it just as we join against other subqueries, other tables. And then we can use the information as you can see at the top. So I have my user ID, I have my average that he spent in the total. And down here, just the same example, right? So I can still filter by a specific user, I can still sort by a specific column in a specific order. So we saw an example just using Python 3, right? So simple example. But like I mentioned, this came up from a Django-based project, so I still wanted to show you how to set it up in Django, which you'll see it's not that much different from the previous example. The big part is the configuration aspect at the beginning, and then we're going to use it the same way. So we're going to retrieve the template, we're going to render it, and then the output, which is just raw SQL, we're going to execute it. Here on the right side, you have kind of an example structure from a project I created for this presentation. So pretty simple also. It just has one application, the example application. But the important part is the settings.py, which stores all of the configurations for the Django project, and that's where we'll also need to configure Jinja 2. So what you'll need to do is we're going to go into our templates variable in the settings.py, Usually it has the Django templating engine by default. You can either extend it, right, and just add another option, Jinja 2. In my case, I didn't need the Django templating engine, so I just replaced it for Jinja 2. And besides also defining it, it is also important to point out the directories, right, where Jinja and Django can look for your templates. So in this case, it's stored inside of my example app on the managers folder, inside of my templates folder. So we talked about using custom managers for encapsulating common logic or custom logic, and that's exactly what we did in this case. So since we're going to do things a little bit differently, so we're not going to use the ORM, we set up our own custom manager. In this case, I call it user manager. I just had my users table, but you can imagine this maybe as a new base manager they can use to encapsulate this renderization logic, so it's common to every manager. We define our template engine as a cached property. We'll just want to retrieve it once, right? So it's our engine object. And then on the render template method, this is where we'll use our engine to retrieve the template using its name. And we're going to render it using some context. And the context is just what we saw before, right? So passing some data to fill parameters, to evaluate certain conditions, etc. At the bottom, we have our list method. And our list method is responsible for listing the users in this case. So it's going to use the render template method. I'm going to pass a template name, which in this case is the list SQL G2 stored inside of the user directory. And I'm going to pass some parameters, which in this case, since it's an example, I didn't explicitly define them, but I think you should definitely do that in order it's easier to understand, more verbose. And if no validation was done before, like we talked about regarding SQL injection and other problems, you should do it too. And then down here, so as we talked before, we can use the connection object, right? And that's what we did. Just execute the raw SQL output and return the results. So you have an example of me using that manager. So I imported the user, used the manager through the objects field, and called the list method. I just passed some parameters as before, the sort by and the sort order, so something simple. And down here, I didn't execute the query. I just wanted to make sure that the template was rendering correctly. So you can see I just printed the output and query looks fine. So if we had to execute it, it would work, just like the previous example. Okay, so we talked about two different solutions. We also talked about the fact Django already comes with ORM, so kind of have a lot of solutions to pick from. And we felt the same back then. So we ended up going with the Jinja templating engine. It's something we've been using for 3 years now. We don't use it solely, right? So we don't only use that, but there are situations where we feel like we need that, and we need to go beyond ORM. But we also needed to evaluate its advantages and disadvantages. So I kind of also wanted to touch a little bit on that today, at least in our opinion, what are those? So in our case, we felt that it was easier to build dynamic queries. So as you can see, we can use for loop, we can use the conditionals to kind of manipulate how our raw SQL output will look like. So it was a lot easier to do that instead of just storing them in string variables across our code and then, depending if a condition was hit, using it or not. We also felt that by using the Jinja templates, it was easier to separate the actual definition of the raw SQL from the data generation validation that we would then include in our template to then generate the final output. So there's a clear separation of concerns. So if we want to make a change, it's easier to understand where to do it. And overall, it's easier to understand the project itself. And also related with this, readability, which was definitely a must. So if you remember what I mentioned about solution number 1, just using raw SQL, we felt that it was hard to extend what we already have. It was hard to understand what was there, also explain it to other people. So overall, we just felt that by using this, we're making a step in the right direction and making it easier for everyone in the team to understand what's exactly in these queries. Disadvantages. So SQL injection risk continues to be one, right? Because in the end, this is just a different way of generating the raw SQL. We're still using raw SQL, so you need to be careful with the data that you're passing to your templates. So the developer is responsible for sanitizing the input, doing the proper validations, everything that we already know. Storing complex logic in the templates can also get out of hand. So, and what I want to kind of emphasize with this is that this is definitely a better solution, in our opinion, to have more complex queries and to build more complex logic. But obviously, there's limits to it, right? And that's what I think everyone needs to keep in their minds when developing a new query or extending them, that sometimes it might be just too big, it might be hard to understand, maybe it's better for a separate operation. So Ginges also suffers from this, this solution also suffers from this. So just be careful with the amount of logic that you're including in a single query. And finally, the limited debugging support. So this is something that, at least to me, I felt a lot in the beginning. I feel like there's kind of a learning curve to it, in the sense that in the beginning it might be hard to understand, for example, if you're getting a specific error in your raw SQL output when you're executing it, where it matches on your template, and trying to understand if it's template definition problem, or if it's related with the data that you're passing to it. So I think there's definitely a learning curve to it to try to understand how to solve the error. But once you overcome that, I feel like it definitely gets easier. So I already presented a couple of solutions, but I wanted to present more, right? And I want to also thank my colleagues at Loca, because before coming here, we kind of did a small internal presentation with this topic, and they mentioned some really cool alternatives that I also wanted to talk about today. One of them is the Django unmanaged models. So it's a pretty great feature provided by Django. So once you're defining your model, you can set it as unmanaged. And what that means in the end is that once Django is trying to look over your models, try to understand which migrations it needs to build and execute with your database, it will skip these unmanaged models because it assumes that you're the one managing it, right? So this is great for situations where maybe the table is already there, or you might have built a materialized view, and then you can use one of these Django unmanaged models to map one-to-one with your materialized view. So this allows you to, in the end, use the ORM to retrieve the data, right? And it does kind of the parsing automatically for you. It parses the data to the model. But it also allows you to build more complex queries. Maybe if you're more used to using raw SQL, it's just easier to also build a materialized view. So definitely an alternative that I feel like everyone should explore. And then query builders, which I feel like it's something very common in every language. I'm going to be honest, in Python I never used it, but I found PyPika to be a really well-known one. And the Django query builder is also another package, I think, built specifically for Django, but PyPika, I think, definitely takes the throne. It was the most well-known one that I found. In the end, this is just a different way of building the raw SQL, right? Just as Ginger is also a different way of building the raw SQL. What I feel like this option is very good at is, in the end, you're using Python classes, you're using Python methods, so it might be easier for people that are most used to using Python than raw SQL to manipulate. And once you have your query ready to go, you can just pass the output to the connection object, just like we did with output that came from the Jinja template renderization. Okay, so that GitHub logo was supposed to be on the final slide, but let's assume this is on purpose. So we talked a lot about different solutions, right? Alternatives. We talked about also using the ORM. And I feel like in the end, it really depends on the team. It really depends on the people. It depends on the expertise of the people around you. Some people might find the ORM to be more than enough. Other people might find the raw SQL does the job. In our case, we found the Jinja templating engine to be a really good solution when we needed something more. It's something that we started to use about 3 years ago. We still use it today. We refactored old queries. We still build new ones with it. So I would advise you to just try it out, see it for yourself, try the other options too, and maybe you'll find the right solution for your project and for your team. Thank you. You have the QR code that I mentioned if you want to scan and you need the presentation.
So, thank you, João, for your talk. Questions?
Thank you. This was very interesting. I have just a curiosity because I never used Jinja before. So how does it work? So at startup, does it like read all the templates and keep them in memory, or does it like read the templates at every request, basically?
That's a really good question. I'm going to be honest, I'm not too sure. I know that you, at startup, specify the place where it should look at, right? So you define the directories, and you also have other types of loaders, especially with Jinja specifically. So I'm not too sure if it loads them dynamically as you request, or if it kind of keeps everything in memory, and then once you request, it's already there. I would have to check.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
Answer is you don't use cached templates, because in settings you provide simply templates loader without wrapping in caching templates. In this case, it's loaded on every request. Question only, no problem. Question only about solution. Why you use context manager with connection? Why not to put the rendered template directly in row command of manager? Because you have already text and you can choose the method row, and the text is rendered template.
Yes. So we've used that in a few cases where you want to map one-to-one to the model, right? But in situations where it's a more complex query and it doesn't match one-to-one with the model that the manager corresponds to, we end up just using the connection object, right? Because then you won't be able to use it because the data doesn't correspond solely to the model. Maybe there's some other information from other places or calculated in the moment.
Any more questions? Do we want to? Okay.
Hey, João. Thanks for your talk.
Thank you.
I like the creative use of templating to add modularity to SQL. Okay, SQL is very powerful and verbose and non-modular. Now, you call out on the SQL injection thing, which is a very serious thing. Okay, so if I had to choose, okay, SQL injection, it's not an option. Bye bye, thanks. But you had a short example, and I'm not familiar with Django code, okay? We have the minimal Django thing with a simple SQL query and the SQL injection. Now, further back. It was one of your first slides with code. I think it was Django. Back, meant further back. Like the minimal example, further back. This one? Okay, this one. And this is using, if I understand your terminology, this is raw SQL for you, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. This doesn't suffer from the problem of SQL injection. This has no problems of SQL injection. So this can be applied to the method, to the idea of the templating, right? Do you agree or not?
So in this situation?
There's no SQL injection problems in this code, okay?
In this situation, no. I would say no.
And this is the kind of, the templating idea that you're suggesting is building that string there, correct?
Not for this situation, right? So this is something pretty simple. I pulled this from the Django documentation.
Sure, it's executing a SQL query.
Yes.
That's what this does.
Yes, but like I said, we didn't use this solution for everything, right? So I feel like you shouldn't use it for every single situation if it's more dependent on the motivation. If you have something more complex, it needs to get managed like that.
My point is, but I'm not familiar with Django. My point is, you're giving the database engine a SQL query, okay, and parameters. There's self.baz there.
Yes.
Right? That's the key to SQL injection protection.
Yes.
Can't this approach be used with your, because the difference in my mind is that your SQL, the SQL you're building is more clever. You're using Jinja to come up with a more manageable, complex, and long query.
Exactly.
But the query arguments or parameters, they can be passed, I suppose, pretty much as in this example.
They could.
Can't they?
But there's situations where you can't, right? For example, if you're using the conditionals, right, another operation.
Yeah, you'll need to know how many of those you need to pass.
And those ones you need to pass to Jinja itself, so you couldn't pass it this way.
Yeah, it's non-trivial, but there's a solution for that. You need to manage that, because you can't talk. I myself tolerate something. Hey, yeah, there's SQL injection problems, but yeah, managing the query is easier.
But,
For
but let me mention,
it depends on your
we also
solutions,
don't
of course.
tolerate it, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
And this is just pure, simple examples, but we don't execute anything that comes. There's
I
proper
love your idea.
validation.
I love the idea
know.
of using templates, okay? But it kind of feels that it needs to be extended with a bit of metadata so that you know with this template output, rendered template, I'll need to feed it these parameters and go. So you need an extra
Yes.
engineering thing around that to solve the problem. Do you agree?
Totally agree in that case. Totally
Okay,
agree.
okay.
And I also want to mention, like I mentioned, this is a pretty simple example.
Sure.
And those are aspects that we also define. Imagine for every single manager, you have specific methods that will return the parameters that you should pass to it. There's
There you
proper
go.
validation.
Yeah.
Obviously, I didn't have time to touch on everything, but
So I
thank
just
you.
wanted to, because I'm not familiar with the Django details of going with giving it raw queries, okay? I might have been misunderstanding, but now we're on the same page. Thanks.
No, thank you.
Hey, really nice idea.
Thank you.
Can you just the example that you gave with the Jinja template? I think it was a very simple example with the users one. I wonder, how do you, for instance, translate the previous slide? If you can go back, please. The complex one, yeah. How would you make this SQL query that in raw SQL or even using Django raw method that is fast, although not very readable, I agree. How would you translate this to the Jinja example? Because I know that saying that this is complex, I agree it is, but I wonder how the new solution with the Jinja template would make this more readable than it is.
That's a really good question, and thank you. I think so. This just small snippet isn't a really good example of what Jinja could do with it, right? Because if you just pass this to Jinja, you're just passing the same parameter, so it will look really similar. Maybe a difference in syntax because you need to those parentheses, right? But the big difference, if you would look at the full method in the way that we manage this, right, in terms of understanding if this part should go into the main query through a condition, pulling data from other places to understand if you should retrieve a specific aspect for the users, that's where Jinja kind of, in my opinion, wins. Because you can define that using the if blocks, using the for loops directly in the template, which I know this example doesn't illustrate that. So imagine that besides this, you add more variables storing other parts of your query, you add conditions kind of deciding them if they should go there or not. And if you move that to Jinja, all of that would be defined there, and then you're just passing the data that it needs to decide, okay, I'm going to include this, I'm not going to include that, etc.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions, suggestions? Nope. To usual.
Thank you.
I'm not right now. Are you sure? I think I'm right now. No, I think it's...
So for our next talk, the last one before our coffee break, self-hosting with your side projects with Django and duct tape by Anjay.
Okay, looks like we're on. So, hello everyone. My name is Angers, and I host all of my side projects on my desk using a little device called the Raspberry Pi. And this little thing can handle a little bit of traffic. In a random month that I pulled the statistics for, I had over 500,000 hits and 200,000 unique visitors across all of them. Now, I think, or at least I'm pretty sure that most of these were bots, but you know, bots are people too, so they can browse the web as well. I have no problems with that. Now, I know what you're thinking. The uptime for this is probably not good. And you're right. I sometimes bump the little device off the desk, and then I have about 7 minutes of downtime before I can scramble back and connect the cables. But all in all, it's really not that terrible. And I get up to 3 to 4 nines, which for side projects, I think is more than acceptable. Now, the type of projects that I usually host, thank you. The type of side projects that I have, they vary quite a lot. I have a goal tracking application that I just used for myself. I have a surfing app that I use so that I know where to go, which beaches to hit every day. I have an app that tracks test runs across all different projects so that I have little graphs for that. And I have another one that helps me find other developers or people that I would like to meet on Mastodon. Because of the distributed nature of that thing, it can be hard to find people with similar interests as you. And I even have one that aggregates posts about conferences on Mastodon so that you can see everything on one place. Pycon Portugal isn't that popular on Mastodon, but if you use this hashtag, your post is going to show up here as well. And I know that there's a lot of different services and tools out there that you can use to simplify this process. And some of them are easy, some of them are really complex. But the reason why I decided not to use them personally was because I just like to tinker with my own devices and have more control over what happens, especially if there's some kind of an event and people rush to my site. I don't want to get a huge bill at the end of the month accidentally. For my personal projects, I prefer the sites just going down. It's cheaper on my pocket. Now, of course, this isn't applicable for all types of projects, so that's why I'm just talking about side projects here. And one thing that I also strive towards is simplicity, because when we're talking about websites, what we're actually doing, we're just sending files between your computer and the server. This thing shouldn't be that complex. You shouldn't need a Kubernetes cluster to handle that. I mean, if we really dive into the core concept of it, it's just a file with a header and then a request header and some body, and then you send something back. Like this thing should be very simple. So why did we make things so complex? Why do you need to know all of these things before you can host a website? Now, unfortunately, I'm also a bit pragmatic, so I didn't end up writing everything from scratch, but I at least tried to take a step back. And instead of the services that I had on the previous slide, I'm using things that are a little bit more simple, or at least a little like a step back, like 10, 20 years, when things used to be a little bit simpler. Now, interestingly, Nosh is a logo that people outside of Portugal probably don't know that well. It's an internet service provider, and it's listed here because that's how the sites actually get to be online. So let's start with the hardware. I like the Raspberry Pi because it's an ARM-based chip. It's quite powerful, and it is completely silent. It doesn't bother me when it's on my desk. It doesn't make a sound, and it's quite small. But you don't have to go out and buy one if you don't have it. You can repurpose an old laptop, an old PC. You can run Linux on pretty much anything these days. So it doesn't really matter what type of hardware that you use. But if you do go with the Raspberry Pi, then the single key thing that you need to be aware of is SD cards. So you're going to probably buy an SD card to install the operating system on, and these things vary a lot in performance and durability. The durability thing is very important because all SD cards have a limited lifespan. At some point, they're just going to fail. And when they do, it looks sort of like this. You get a kernel panic. It says that it's unable to mount the root FS because of an unknown block, and you're kind of screwed. This happened to me a month ago. It was time that SD card had to go. Fortunately, what I've learned was that SD cards, when they do die, they get stuck in read-only mode, and you can usually restore most of the data on them. So it's not that bad. But you do have to set up a new one, and that does take a little bit of time. So keep that in mind. Okay, so now that we have the hardware sorted out, we can look at the software that we're going to use. Now, Linux is a great choice for these sort of things. You can host servers on Windows as well, although I'm not sure if anyone actually wants to do that. They're usually forced to do it, but that's how the world is. So the operating system to install on the Raspberry Pi, or the recommended one, is the Raspberry Pi OS, which is essentially Debian in disguise, or Debian with a little bit of optimizations on top of it so that it works a little bit better on limited hardware. And then when we have the operating system sorted out, of course, we're at a Python conference, so we do want to make sure we have Python installed. And this is where maybe Debian isn't the best choice, mostly because the way that the package policy that Debian has, where one package should only contain one binary, kind of doesn't go well with the way that Python is packaged, where we usually want to have multiple tools alongside it. Pip is a great example of this. So you might end up with a Python that doesn't have pip, which makes it a little bit weird. You can fix this with a simple install, or you can compile Python from source. And this is actually easier than one would think. It's essentially just running these 4 commands and then waiting for like 10 to 15 minutes for it to complete. But this summer, there was an announcement from the Astral team. They released a new version of UV that also supports installing Python now. So you can, if you don't want to wait for Python to compile, you can easily install the latest version by using uv python install subcommand. And this loads a pre-built binary, so it's a lot faster. It usually takes just a couple of seconds for you to download the binary, and then after that, if you do it again, it's gonna be super fast. Okay, now that we have a Python setup, it's time for us to figure out how to get a HTTP server going. And you would think that using the Python's HTTP server module would be a good idea, but unfortunately it isn't, because the HTTP server isn't really recommended for production use because it's not very secure. So instead of that, you have to go and find some other piece of software. I personally like to use Nginx. There are other options. Caddy, I've heard great things about it. It's a newer one based on written in Go that's getting quite popular. There's Apache, and there's a few other options. But once you install your web server, in this example Nginx, you already have a website working. And if your grandmother lives with you, you can send her the internal IP address of your Raspberry Pi, and she'll be able to load your PyScript program from there. Unfortunately, your grandmother probably doesn't live with you, so let's figure out how to actually put this thing on the internet now. So in most of our homes, the internet comes through a box that your internet service provider gives you. And this box is usually a modem/router, usually a single device for both of those things. So you have to go to that thing and tell it, oh, there are some requests that I want you to forward to my Raspberry Pi device instead. And this is called port forwarding. And if you're a NOS customer like I am, you have to go to this website to configure it. Even if you're a foreigner, it's not a problem, because port forwarding isn't even translatable or translated in Portuguese. So it's going to be easy for you to understand what's going on. And there are essentially just 3 ports that I usually have to forward to my device. The first one is port 80, which is for HTTP traffic. This is mostly just so that you can redirect users to the port 443, which is for HTTPS. And then port 22, which is the default port for SSH, so that you can log into your Raspberry Pi device even if you're not at the home network. And after that, you have a public IP, so your grandmother can access it even if she lives somewhere else. And that's all great until you realize that now you put a device on the internet and it immediately becomes a target for some of those bots that I have in the statistics. Here are my SSHD logs, and I'm sorry if the font is a little bit small, but almost every 2 lines is an attempt by some bot to try to log into my device using random usernames, passwords, and so forth. So you do have to make sure that you're at least a little bit protected from this sort of things. If you have SSH configured or exposed like that, one of the best things that you can do is to disable password authentication. That way you can only log in with your private and public key pair, which is immediately a lot safer. But even if you have all of your services locked down, there are still countless bad things that can happen to you. Like 2 weeks ago, we realized that your printer can hack you, or a malicious user that is presenting himself as a printer server can actually gain access to your device. Or at the beginning of this year, we had this huge CVE published explaining that there was an attempt of embedding malicious code into the XZ library that's used by OpenSSH. And if this wasn't discovered, then some hacker could essentially have the keys to any box that has OpenSSH installed, which really wouldn't be good. So if you take one thing from this talk, if you're running something that's exposed to the internet, make sure it's up to date. Make sure that you apply updates as often as possible, because that's really your only line of defense for this sort of issues or problems that get discovered. Okay, so at this time, you're probably sick and tired of giving your grandma an IP address to connect to your website. So let's just quickly talk about how to configure a domain name. So you go and buy a domain, and then in the domain name server, you can specify which IP address that domain should point to. And then, of course, nobody trusts HTTP anymore, so you'll also have to figure out how to get the SSL certificates. This used to be really painful, kind of expensive, and super annoying back in the day. But these days, since Let's Encrypt sort of revolutionized the whole process, it's just a matter of installing their cert bot and then running it regularly with Nginx flag, and it will update the certificates and set up everything the way that it needs to be set up. I'm actually blown away how easy it is to get SSL certificates these days. It's super easy. But there's one more thing that we need to figure out before this is going to be actually reliable. And this is the fact that when you get a public IP address from your internet service provider, they usually give you a dynamic address. And what this means is that your IP just changes every other day, every other week, every other month. You don't really know when. For me, this used to happen when I left home to go for vacation, which meant that, of course, I'm not going to be able to resolve the issue until I get back. So I had a bunch of downtime because of this. Now, you can ask your internet service provider to give you a static IP address, and sometimes they do. Nosh didn't, or at least they didn't like me that much. So I wrote a little helper tool that simply just runs on the device, checks its public IP address, checks the DNS record, and if they match, it's all good. It goes to sleep for a couple of minutes. But if there's a mismatch, then the device, then the script is going to update the domain name server record and use the new IP address. It's kind of stupid, but it actually works. Okay, so we currently have everything set up to host a static website, but let's say you want to add users, store things into the database, and so forth. How do we get Django to work on all of this? Now, of course, you're going to have to start a new Python project, which of course means creating virtual environments, activating them, and so forth. This also got a little bit simplified if you are on the UV bandwagon. The UV init command creates the virtual environment for you. When you write UV add, it installs Django and puts it in the UV log file. So it just streamlines the development for you, and it's super fast and quite nice. When we saw that graph of stars just going straight up, I think the Python packaging ecosystem really needed like a push like that to improve the development experience of the whole thing. So I think this really does simplify things for us quite a bit. Now, one thing that's kind of annoying here is that even though Django has a run server command, that thing doesn't actually run a proper server. It's just the development server that you use during, well, development. So to be safe in putting this into production, you need to install yet another server. Like this is, I guess, the third server that we're now installing on our Raspberry Pi. That's going to basically communicate between Nginx and your Python application. So there's a bunch of great WSGI or ASCII servers in the Python ecosystem. I'm old or oldish, so I like gUnicorn. But like I said, there are also other options out there. And this is how you run it. Now we have another problem. We have to make sure that this process, the gUnicorn process, doesn't crash on us, that it's always available. If the Raspberry Pi needs to reboot, we want it to start the gUnicorn process as well so that our site gets back up. And for this, we kind of have to delve a little bit into systemd. And this is the Linux system for starting services. This has gotten a lot of hate or a lot of controversy over the years. But for what we really needed, it is not all that complex. We need to write this .service file. And really the most interesting part here is the part where we define what we really need to do. The rest is sort of boilerplatey. And again, we just wanted to run our gUnicorn process, and that's pretty much it. After that, when we run the enable command, we make sure that this thing is going to start every time Linux starts, and then if we want to start it immediately, we can just run the start command, and it's hopefully going to work. Okay, we have Nginx, we have gUnicorn, we just have to let them know about each other, which, again, a little bit of boilerplate code, because we now have to configure a proxy pass from Nginx to gUnicorn. Again, a lot of boilerplate code, but essentially we just want them to communicate through a Unix socket, and this is essentially how you get that done. Okay, and now we have the code set up, but we'll probably want to update it. And you don't really want to manually SSH into the box every time that you want to do that and do a git pull and all those things. So instead, what I do is I get a GitHub action that SSHs into the box and does a git pull and does all of that for me. Again, a lot of boilerplate code, but it just calls a script on my project, and that script is essentially this. It's a git pull, it updates the dependencies, it runs the Python manage commands that I want, collect static and migrate, and then this kill -hub command, it just sends a special signal to gUnicorn that causes us to restart gracefully without dropping current connections, so that it's kind of seamless the way that it switches over. Databases, you can install either SQLite or Postgres or MySQL on the Raspberry Pi as well. If you have a big storage SD card, then even storing data isn't going to be that problematic, as long as you remember that the SD card can die at some point and you have backups. And I'll talk a little bit more about SQLite and the gotchas with Django with it tomorrow when I have another talk. But it is also possible to use it in production. So in summary, if you want to get a Python application running from your home, you just get a device where you're going to host it, install Python on it, run the web server, use something like GUnicorn, and make sure that the process starts using systemd, and then you can put some GitHub Actions in place to improve the developer experience, and yeah, you can use SQLite or Postgres for data. So really, I mean, there could be a few fewer steps in this process, and that would make it a little bit easier. But I'm hoping that I've shown you that this really isn't that difficult, and that any of you could do this, so that we get a bit more, that we embrace this nature of the internet, the distributed nature of it, and instead of just posting on Facebook or Instagram, we just have our own little sites that we have, that we can share with each other. Because I think that would make the internet a lot more interesting than what it is currently becoming. That's it. Thank you. Questions?
So questions, we already have one.
Incredible. Thank you. In start line with GUnicorn, I see you use WSGI protocol. Are you try ASCII, and which problem can appear? What was?
Yeah, I have played around with ASCII. One of those projects is using ASCII. In my experience, at least in Django land, ASCII isn't as fully featured yet. And you often just hit one thing or another that hasn't been ported to ASCII yet. I think the last thing that I've seen missing were the cache decorators. I believe maybe those have already gotten fixed in the newer versions, but when I was trying it, like you couldn't have cached views on ASCII. So there's some little things that, at least when it comes to Django, it's not fully there yet. But in a couple of years, I think all of those things are going to go away. And if you use another web framework that was ASCII first, you're not going to run into these problems at all. And then at this sort of scale that my sites are running, it really doesn't make much of a difference performance-wise, since I'm not getting that many hits on these websites. Yeah, I don't know. I can talk about WSGI versus ASCII for quite a long time, so we can chat more about it after in the hallway.
Thank you. One question about the internal IP address of your Raspberry Pi. That never changed on you? Because it can happen also, right? I think you have to also mark it as a static IP. Somewhere.
Yes. That depends on your router configuration. In my experience, routers generally remember the MAC address of the device that's connected and then try to give it the same IP address even if it goes offline and comes back on. So in practice, it's not very often that the internal IP address changes. But again, this might depend on your router itself. So make sure that you assign it a proper IP. Yeah. Yeah.
That was a great talk. When you showed the frequency of the bots, do you have anything in terms of security, like blacklisting the IP addresses or anything like that?
Yeah. I've tried a bunch of those tools. One that I liked a lot was not for the web traffic, but for the SSH traffic. It's fail to ban. The way it works is you get 3 attempts. If you put the wrong password, or I mean 3 attempts, but that's configurable. If you put the wrong password 3 times, it just bans that IP. It's great. I did ban myself because I was trying it. And I wasn't home at that time, so that wasn't very smart. But yeah, there are tools to help with that, and so some of the bots, I mean, you have control of them. If with your robots.txt, if you're getting too much traffic from search bots that you don't really want, some of them do respect what you put in robots.txt, but not the ones that are trying to exploit the site because, I mean, they're not being nice in the first place. So.
Questions? Anyone? Back to you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
So this was our last talk before lunch break. A break outside. We'll see you in 30 minutes. Thank you.